NBA Legends Profiles. The story of Stephen Curry. The underdog mentality, the analytical provocateur, before he was a global icon. Experts claimed his frail frame would never survive the physicality of the league. But by weaponizing a mechanical jump shot, Stephen Curry didn't just play the game. He dismantled the very geometry of professional basketball. Watch how one underdog permanently broke every defensive scheme ever invented. The baseline of modern basketball is divided into two distinct epochs, before Stephen Curry and after Stephen Curry. To understand how a single human being could alter the structural reality of a global sport, one must look past the highlight reels and examine the cold, rigid physics of the hardwood floor. For 70 years, basketball was a game governed by proximity. The closer you were to the iron rim, the higher your probability of success, and the more valuable you were to an organization. This spatial monopoly favored the massive, the brutal, and the vertically gifted. If you were a guard, your job was to facilitate, to navigate the perimeter like a satellite orbiting a massive planet, eventually feeding the ball into the interior where the real war was waged. Then came the frail boy from Davidson College with ankles that seemed constructed of glass and paper. When Curry entered the NBA draft process, the scouting reports read like a medical autopsy of an athletic career before it had even begun. They said he was too small. They said he lacked the explosive first step required to separate from elite perimeter defenders. They warned that his release point was too low, that his frame would crumble under the nightly, bruising attrition of an 82-game schedule. The analytical consensus of the era was clear. A team could not build a championship infrastructure around a perimeter player who relied primarily on the jump shot. It was considered a statistical gamble, a high-variance strategy that would inevitably dry up in the suffocating heat of the postseason. What the analytical establishment failed to account for was that Curry was not just a shooter. He was a highly calibrated spatial disruptor. He understood, perhaps intuitively before the data caught up, that a three-point shot taken from 26 feet carried a higher expected value than a contested mid-range jumper taken from 15 feet, provided the shooter could maintain a baseline efficiency above 40%. To achieve this, Curry weaponized a mechanical jump shot that defied the traditional teaching of the sport. Classic basketball philosophy dictated a two-motion shot. Jump to the apex of your vertical leap, pause momentarily to stabilize the ball, and flick the wrist. This was the gospel of Michael Jordan and Ray Allen. It was beautiful, but it was slow, and it required immense vertical energy. Curry pioneered the one-motion shot. He transferred the kinetic energy directly from his sneakers through his kinetic chain, his ankles, knees, hips, and core, and into the ball before his feet even left the hardwood. The release took less than 0.3 seconds. It was a lightning strike masquerading as a basketball play. By executing this shot with unprecedented velocity, Curry effectively extended the boundaries of the playable court. Traditional defensive schemes were built around the concept of the shell, a defensive perimeter that typically began around 23 feet from the basket. Coaches taught defenders to drop back, protect the paint, and dare opponents to shoot from deep distance. Curry rendered this entire philosophy obsolete in a single afternoon. When an offensive player can reliably hit a jumper from 30 feet out with a defender in his jersey, the shell cracks. The defense is forced to extend its lines, stretching its players across a vast ocean of hardwood. This spatial extension created a profound geometric paradox for opposing coaches. If you guard Curry 30 feet from the basket, you're leaving 40 feet of empty space behind you. The paint becomes a ghost town. Lanes that were once clogged by 7-foot rim protectors are suddenly wide open for cutters and slashers. By simply standing on the floor, 10 feet behind the three-point line, Curry exerts a gravitational pull that warps the positioning of all 5 defensive players. He became an analytical provocateur, a player whose mere presence forced statisticians to throw out decades of accumulated data and start from scratch. The destruction of defensive geometry was not merely an aesthetic triumph. It was a psychological demolition. For decades, NBA defenses prided themselves on their ability to dictate terms through physical intimidation. They would bump you off your spot, contest your vision, and use their bodies to make you feel every single minute on the floor. Curry bypassed this entire economy of violence. How do you intimidate a player who doesn't need to get close to you to destroy you? How do you project physicality against a ghost who releases the ball before your hand can even reach his chest? The frustration this caused across the league was palpable. Elite, championship-level defenses found themselves looking completely helpless, reduced to watching leather trace a perfect parabola into the net over and over again. The narrative arc: he was the overlooked prospect no one believed in, a shooter deemed too small for greatness. Yet, through sheer precision, he transformed from a collegiate underdog into the NBA's only unanimous MVP. This is the definitive story of how Curry's high-volume scoring redefined efficiency and changed the sport of basketball forever. The journey of Stephen Curry is not a linear tale of destiny. It is a masterclass in the accumulation of marginal gains. To fully appreciate the magnitude of his ascent, one must travel back to the campus of Davidson College, a small liberal arts school in North Carolina that had not won an NCAA tournament game since the mid-1960s. When Curry arrived there, he was so slight that his jersey seemed to hang off his collarbones like a sail on a windless day. He was the son of Del Curry, an elite NBA sharpshooter, yet major college programs looked at his physical profile and walked away. Duke, North Carolina, and Virginia didn't see a future superstar. They saw a defensive liability who would get overpowered in the Atlantic Coast Conference. This rejection built the foundational bedrock of his career, the underdog mentality. Being an underdog in professional sports is often romanticized as a state of emotional fuel, a chip on the shoulder that drives a player to run faster or jump higher. For Curry, however, the underdog mentality was a cold, pragmatic realization. He knew he could never outjump his opponent. He knew he could never run through a defender's chest. Therefore, his path to dominance required absolute perfection in the areas he could control: cardiovascular endurance, spatial awareness, and manual dexterity. The 2008 NCAA tournament was the first major cracks in the old basketball order. Leading a mid-major school against national powerhouses, Curry went on a historic scoring tier that captured the collective imagination of the sports world. He wasn't just scoring. He was doing it with a joyful, almost disrespectful audacity. He was pulling up from distances that made coaches wince, yet the ball continued to find its home. It was during this collegiate run that the blueprint for his NBA career was forged. High-volume scoring, when paired with elite efficiency, could compensate for any physical deficit. When the Golden State Warriors selected him with the 7th overall pick in the 2009 NBA draft, the basketball establishment remained deeply skeptical. The early years of his professional career did little to dispel these doubts. His ankles became a recurring nightmare, a structural flaw that threatened to derail his career before it ever truly started. There were nights when his ankle would give out on a simple crossover, leaving him writhing on the floor while fans held their breath. The media began to label him as a tragic what-if story, a brilliant talent betrayed by his own anatomy. It was during this period of physical vulnerability that Curry's character was forged. Instead of giving in to despair, he re-engineered his entire physical movement profile. Under the guidance of specialist trainers, he learned to stop moving purely from his ankles and instead generate power and stability from his hips and core. He turned his body into a highly efficient kinetic engine. This shift did more than just protect his joints. It unlocked a new level of functional strength that would allow him to withstand the physical punishment awaiting him at the sport's highest levels. The transformation culminated in the historic 2015-16 NBA season, a campaign that remains the gold standard for offensive efficiency in sports history. The numbers from that year read like science fiction: 402 three-point field goals made in a single season. To put that in perspective, no player had ever made 300 in a season prior to that moment. He averaged over 30 points per game while entering the elusive 50-40-90 club, shooting over 50% from the field, 40% from beyond the arc, and 90% from the free throw line. It was an offensive display so pure, so mathematically absurd, that it earned him the first and only unanimous Most Valuable Player award in the history of the league. The true legacy of that unanimous MVP season was not the trophy itself, but the total democratization of high-volume scoring. Before Curry, it was an accepted axiom that the more shots a player took, the lower their efficiency would drop. This was the tax of volume scoring. Curry broke that law. As his shot attempts skyrocketed, his efficiency actually increased. He proved that a player could take 15 three-pointers a night and still maintain the precision of a surgeon. He changed the calculation of what constituted a good shot. A 30-foot pull-up jumper in transition, once considered a benchable offense by traditional coaches, became the most statistically lethal play in the game. The strategic disruptor: what happens when a single player renders traditional defense completely obsolete? By mastering the perimeter, Stephen Curry forced the entire NBA to rewrite its strategic playbook or face certain extinction. We are diving deep into the evolution of a legend who turned the three-pointer into the most lethal weapon in sports history. To see the full scope of Stephen Curry's impact, one must analyze the tactical panic he caused in film rooms across the United States. For decades, NBA defensive strategy was built on a series of predictable compromises. Coaches would design their schemes to give up certain shots while protecting others. You would give up the long, contested two-point jumper to protect the rim. You would sag off a non-shooting guard to provide help defense in the paint. You would utilize a drop coverage on the pick and roll, instructing your big man to stay back and protect against the drive while the perimeter defender fought over the top of the screen. Curry took these classic defensive compromises and turned them into instruments of self-destruction. Take the pick and roll, the fundamental building block of modern basketball offense. When a defender chose to drop back against a Curry pick and roll, Curry would simply stop on a dime and launch a 28-foot jumper before the big man could even register the threat. If the defender chose to step up and meet him at the level of the screen, Curry would use his elite handle to blow past him, drawing a second defender and creating a 4-on-3 advantage for his teammates. If a team decided to switch defenses entirely, putting a versatile forward or center on him, Curry would isolate them on the perimeter, dancing with the ball until the defender's center of gravity was completely broken before stepping back for a dagger three. This tactical versatility forced the creation of entirely new defensive coverages. Teams began employing the hedge and recover, where defenders would sprint out to disrupt Curry's rhythm before scrambling back to their original assignments. Others resorted to the box and one, a high school defensive scheme where 4 players stand in a zone while one lone defender follows Curry everywhere he goes on the court, completely ignoring the ball. It was a strategy born of pure desperation, an admission that standard professional defensive systems were utterly incapable of containing him. Yet, focusing solely on Curry's ability with the ball in his hands misses the most terrifying aspect of his game: his off-ball movement. Most NBA superstars rest when they do not have the ball. They stand on the wing, hands on hips, catching their breath while a teammate orchestrates the offense. Curry does the opposite. The moment he passes the ball, he becomes a perpetual motion machine. He sprints through a maze of baseline screens, changes direction with violent cuts, and loops around the perimeter at an elite pace. This constant movement acts as a form of psychological torture for opposing defenders. You cannot relax for a single millisecond. If you look away to check the position of the ball, Curry is gone, vanished into a crowd of bodies, only to reappear moments later on the opposite wing, completely open. This off-ball gravity turns his teammates into lethal weapons. When Curry sprints toward the corner, he often draws 2 or 3 defenders with him, all panicked by the prospect of giving up an open shot. This leaves the entire middle of the floor open for easy layups and dunks. He created an ecosystem where his mere movement, without even touching the basketball, could tear an elite defense apart. The ripple effect of this strategic disruption extended far beyond the Warriors roster. It altered the entire talent evaluation pipeline of the NBA. Before Curry, the league was filled with traditional, slow-moving big men whose primary value was rim protection and physical rebounding. Once Curry extended the floor, these players became liabilities. If a center could not slide their feet on the perimeter and guard a pick and roll 30 feet from the basket, they could no longer survive on an NBA floor. They were systematically hunted, dragged out to the perimeter by Curry, and exposed on national television. Conversely, the value of perimeter shooting and tactical versatility skyrocketed. Every team in the league began searching for their own version of space creators. The 3-and-D archetype, players who could play defense and hit outside shots, became the most sought-after commodity in the sport. General managers stopped looking for the next physical powerhouse and started searching for prospects who possessed the processing speed and shooting touch to thrive in this new, open-floor era. The entire economy of the league shifted because one underdog proved that skill could conquer raw physical size. The philosophy of the long range: to truly understand the phenomenon of Stephen Curry, one must look beyond the stat sheets, the tactical playbooks, and the championship rings. We have to look at the psychological and philosophical shift he brought to the game of basketball. For decades, the sport was viewed through a lens of conservative restraint. Coaches preached discipline, which usually meant hunting for the highest percentage shot within the confines of a rigid, predictable system. The three-point shot was treated as a luxury item, a special tool to be used sparingly, typically at the end of a shot clock or when trailing late in a game. It was an afterthought, an ornament on the house that physical interior play had built. Curry transformed the three-pointer from a desperate alternative into an elegant philosophy of play. He approached the court not as a set of fixed coordinates, but as a fluid canvas where distance was completely relative. In doing so, he challenged the deeply ingrained cultural norms of what constituted good and bad basketball. For generations, a player who shot the ball from 30 feet out in transition would be immediately benched, scolded for their selfishness and lack of discipline. Curry changed that shot from an act of rebellion into the most efficient offensive play in sports history. He democratized the floor, proving that precision, repetition, and confidence could render physical boundaries irrelevant. This philosophical shift had a profound impact on the youth infrastructure of sport. Walk onto any playground or local gymnasium anywhere in the world today, and you will see children wearing the number 30 jersey, launching shots from steps behind the three-point line. Critics of this movement often lament that Curry ruined the game, claiming that young players now bypass the foundational fundamentals of footwork and layup execution in favor of launching wild, inefficient deep shots. But this critique misses the deeper truth of his influence. Curry didn't ruin the game. He expanded its imagination. He gave hope to an entire generation of athletes who were not blessed with freakish height or vertical bounce. He showed that greatness could be achieved through the mastery of fine motor skills, through the obsessive calibration of hand-eye coordination, and through an unwavering belief in one's own preparation. To see a young kid pulling up from deep is not a sign of the sport's decay. It is a testament to the expansion of human potential. Curry proved that with enough dedication, the human body could turn a distant, improbable target into a highly predictable, repeatable destination. Furthermore, his style of play introduced a new emotional currency to the NBA: joy. The dominant figures who preceded him, players like Michael Jordan, Kobe Bryant, and LeBron James, approached the game with a fierce, often terrifying intensity. They conquered their opponents through physical dominance and psychological warfare. They scowled, they trash-talked, and they wore down their adversaries with a grim, relentless focus. Curry brought something entirely different to the floor: a lighthearted, almost childlike exuberance. He celebrated deep shots with a shimmy, ran down the court with a massive smile, and played with a visible sense of fun that contrasted with the league's traditional stoicism. This joy was not a sign of weakness. It was a potent psychological weapon. It is deeply demoralizing to play against someone who is destroying your life's work while looking like they're having the time of their life at a summer park. When Curry hits a 35-foot shot and dances back down the court, he is sending a clear message to his opponent: this is easy for me. You cannot stop me, and your entire defensive system is nothing more than an amusement park ride for my entertainment. It shifted the power dynamic of elite sports, proving that competitive fire did not need to be packaged in anger or intimidation to be lethal. Ultimately, the story of Stephen Curry is a story about the triumph of intellect and skill over raw, unyielding power. He was the underdog who refused to accept the limitations imposed upon him by the scouting reports, the analysts, and the historical precedents of his sport. By mastering the perimeter, by embracing a high-volume, high-efficiency approach to scoring, and by maintaining a joyful, unwavering belief in his own unique gifts, he didn't just climb to the top of the basketball world. He broke it apart, rebuilt it in his own image, and left an indelible mark on the geometry of the sport forever. The ripple effect across global culture, the transformation of basketball under Curry's stewardship, did not stop at the boundaries of the NBA hardwood. It spilled over into global sports culture, rewriting the script for how athletes across all disciplines view performance, marketing, and the definition of an athletic archetype. Before Curry's ascent, the cultural imagination of superstar athlete was almost exclusively occupied by the hypermuscular, larger-than-life figure. The world looked at athletes as modern gladiators, genetic anomalies whose physical dimensions placed them far above the average human being. Curry fractured that mold entirely, offering a masterclass in relatability that forever changed the commercial and cultural landscape of global sports. When a fan looks at a 7-foot center or an incredibly muscular forward sprinting down the floor, there's an inherent, unbridgeable cognitive distance. The average person understands that no matter how hard they train, they can never grow to be 7 feet tall, nor can they develop a 45-inch vertical leap. The physical gifts of traditional superstars are exclusive, governed by genetic lotteries that bar entry to the vast majority of humanity. Curry, however, presents a striking optical illusion. Standing at a normal 6'3" and possessing a lean, unassuming frame, he looks remarkably like an ordinary person who somehow wandered onto an NBA floor. This illusion of normalcy became his greatest cultural asset. It created an unprecedented level of empathy and emulation among sports fans worldwide. When Curry plays, fans do not just watch in awe. They feel as though they are watching a version of themselves that has achieved absolute perfection. The message embedded within his style of play is profoundly democratic. If you work hard enough, if you master your skills, if you refine your mechanics with obsessive devotion, you too can conquer giants. This shift completely reorganized the sneaker and sports apparel industries. For decades, the industry axiom was that big men don't sell shoes. The market was dominated by explosive wing players whose shoes promised to help you fly. Curry broke this marketing monopoly by partnering with Under Armour, a brand that was an underdog in the basketball space, mirroring his own professional journey. Together, they built a multi-billion-dollar empire centered around a shoe line that didn't promise to make you jump over the rim, but promised to give you the stability and precision to shoot over anyone. It was a commercial triumph rooted in the democratization of skill over athletic privilege. Beyond the commercial sphere, Curry's influence fundamentally altered the strategic development of sports analytics in other fields. Soccer clubs, baseball franchises, and American football teams began looking at his success as a proof of concept for spatial optimization. If a basketball team could achieve historic dominance by maximizing the statistical value of the deep perimeter, where else were sports organizations leaving value on the table? In European football, teams began placing a higher premium on inverted wingers who could create high-value shooting angles from distance, mimicking the spatial distortion Curry pioneered. In the NFL, offensive coordinators began designing passing schemes that stretched defenses horizontally and vertically to a degree never seen before, explicitly citing the spacing concepts of the Golden State Warriors. The underdog mentality, once viewed as a simple narrative trope used to motivate sports teams, was elevated by Curry into an institutional philosophy. It proved that organizations do not need to possess the most traditionally dominant assets to win championships. Instead, they can achieve historic success by identifying undervalued spaces, committing to elite technical execution, and fostering an environment of collaborative joy. He became a living case study for disruption, studied by tech executives in Silicon Valley, educators in classrooms, and athletes across the globe. He showed that when you're smaller, lighter, and less protected than your competitors, your only path to survival is to completely change the rules of the engagement. The longevity of the revolution, as the narrative of Stephen Curry's career enters its later chapters. The conversation naturally shifts from the explosive disruption of his youth to the profound resilience of his longevity. The ultimate test of any strategic revolutionary is not whether they can shock the world for a season or two, but whether their ideas can withstand the inevitable counterattacks of an entire industry determined to neutralize them. For over a decade, the greatest minds in basketball have dedicated thousands of hours of film study, drafted complex defensive algorithms, and trained an entire generation of athletes for the sole purpose of stopping Stephen Curry. Yet, the revolution has not been contained. It has endured, adapted, and age with an elegance that defies the standard trajectory of aging superstar guards. The conventional wisdom of the NBA dictated that small, skill-reliant guards age poorly. Once the initial burst of youth begins to fade and the first step loses a fraction of its velocity, the window of dominance typically slams shut. But Curry's career has subverted this law of athletic decline. His sustained excellence into his mid to late 30s is a direct result of the nature of his revolution. Because his dominance was never built on raw, explosive athleticism, it was not subject to the rapid depreciation that catches up with high-flying players. You cannot outage a jump shot that relies on kinetic harmony rather than vertical leap. You cannot neutralize a basketball IQ that processes spatial geometry faster than any defensive rotation can adjust. To maintain this level of performance, Curry transformed his training regimen into an elite laboratory of human endurance. His workouts have become legendary across the sports world for their sheer intensity, focusing on sensory deprivation, neurocognitive processing, and cardiovascular conditioning that leaves other professional athletes physically ill. He trains his brain to track multiple visual targets while his heart rate is running at maximum capacity. He uses strobe glasses to disrupt his depth perception during shooting drills, forcing his mind to rely entirely on muscle memory and spatial intuition. This obsessive preparation unlocked a late-career masterpiece, the 2022 NBA championship. Entering that season, critics claimed the Warriors' dynasty was dead, buried under a mountain of injuries, roster turnover, and the inevitable march of time. Curry was viewed as an aging superstar whose best days were firmly behind him. Instead, he delivered a virtuoso performance, culminating in a historic finals display against a Boston Celtics defense that was hailed as one of the most physically punishing units of the modern era. He did not just shoot over them. He wore them down, systematically picking apart their schemes with a combination of off-ball movement, high-volume scoring, and a hardened physical resilience that silenced any remaining skeptics. When he hoisted his fourth championship trophy and his first Finals MVP award, it was the ultimate validation of his career's thesis. It proved that the spacing revolution he initiated was not a temporary trend or a collection of statistical anomalies, but an enduring, permanent evolution of the sport. He had gone from an overlooked, fragile prospect to a foundational pillar of basketball history, sitting alongside legends like Bill Russell, Magic Johnson, Michael Jordan, and LeBron James at the sport's absolute mountaintop. The true measure of his longevity, however, is found in the lack of a true successor. For all the young players who have grown up emulating his style, for all the deep shots launched on playgrounds and in high school gymnasiums, there is still only one Stephen Curry. Many have copied the volume of his shooting, but none have matched the surgical precision of his efficiency, the relentless engine of his off-ball movement, or the calm poise of his underdog mentality. He remains an anomaly, a singular figure who stands at the intersection of mathematical perfection and athletic grace. The final blueprint, when historians look back at the history of professional sports, they will identify only a handful of athletes who left their game entirely unrecognizable from the day they found it. Babe Ruth did it for baseball by introducing the home run as a primary offensive weapon. Wayne Gretzky did it for hockey by mapping out the empty space behind the net. And Stephen Curry did it for basketball by shifting the center of gravity 25 feet away from the basket. His legacy is etched not just in the record books or the trophy cases, but in the structural layout of every basketball court in existence. He provided the final blueprint for how an underdog can conquer an environment designed for giants. It is a blueprint that rejects the tyranny of physical limitations, places absolute faith in the power of obsessive preparation, and finds its ultimate expression in the pursuit of technical perfection. He showed that the geometry of any system, no matter how long it has stood, can be dismantled if you possess the vision to see past its traditional boundaries and the courage to shoot from places where no one else has ever dared to stand. The story of Stephen Curry is a testament to the fact that greatness does not arrive in a uniform physical package. It does not always announce itself with explosive power or terrifying size. Sometimes greatness arrives with a lean frame, a joyful smile, and a mechanical jump shot so perfectly calibrated that it can change the world in less than 0.3 of a second. He will forever be remembered as the underdog who permanently broke every defensive scheme ever invented, the analytical provocateur who turned a luxury shot into a lethal philosophy, and the strategic disruptor who forced a global sport to rewrite its entire playbook. As the final buzzers sound on his career and his jersey eventually rises to the rafters, the game will continue to be played in the vast, open spaces he created. The three-point line will remain not as a border, but as a monument to his vision. Every deep shot launched in transition, every pick-and-roll defended at half-court, and every joyful celebration on the hardwood will serve as a living, breathing tribute to the frail boy from Davidson who dared to look at a basketball court and see a completely different universe. He didn't just play the game, he set it free.